Hi, everybody. Welcome back. If you don't know, my name is Cooper, and today we're going to be talking about what makes a room feel designed versus decorated. Have you ever walked into your space and felt like, oh, this looks nice, but it just feels like something's a little off, or the vision isn't coming together as you imagined? This could be because your room is feeling decorated rather than designed. So, what do I mean by this, right? What is decorated versus designed? A decorated room is a room in which objects are placed at random or at convenience without another level of intention behind them. Decorated spaces usually tend to be pretty trend driven, as well as feeling a little bit flat or disconnected from the rest of your space. Whereas for a design space, there's a clear and thorough thought process behind things that defines a flow, a hierarchy, and includes spatial logic. I also just wanted to give a quick disclaimer about this. These are all my definitions and all my opinions, and I just wanted to make it clear that it's totally fine if you disagree, because the number one thing that I always say is what matters most is that you are happy with your space. I'm just here to give my 2 cents to you guys if you need some help. So what are some common traits that make a room feel decorated, right? As I said before in the definition, it feels a little bit flat and disconnected, but why does this happen? One thing that I would highly recommend avoiding when designing your space is buying everything from the same store. I know that this can be pretty tempting because it's very convenient and easy, especially if you just moved into a space, but a lot of the time it can make the room feel a little bit uninteresting and kind of like you're in that department store, which I don't think is the goal for anybody. Generally, it just creates a really flat space that makes it even harder for you to liven up with decor. So instead of doing that, really take your time. This is something that I always emphasize because it is really important. If you move into your apartment or your house and you rush into buying furniture, you're not going to like the end product. You really got to take it slow and kind of culminate things as you move through time. The next thing is playing it safe when it comes to contrast, height, and scale. So decorated spaces tend to feel a little bit random and a little bit cluttered for the reason that things aren't intentionally placed. And something that goes with saying that is understanding how scale operates in this situation to create a visual balance. So let's take my living room, for example. I have a lot of horizontal lines going on within the architecture and the furniture of the space. And so when I moved in, although the ceilings are high, it did draw down the ceilings a little bit. So I really needed to incorporate some vertical scale to balance out the space. Something that I did this through was adding floor to ceiling curtains. This can really help elevate your space height-wise and make the room feel much taller. I also incorporated vertical art rather than horizontal art because it will also draw your eyes up a little bit and not just to the low flat-lined furniture. This is also really important to take into account when it comes to texture. A lot of the times, decorated spaces will feel a little bit off because there's a lack of texture and you've gone really linear with the fabrics or materials that you select. You want to bring in a variety of visual texture. You can do this through, patterns, or you can do it through materials. So in my apartment, personally, I've done it through materials. I have a wonderful wool rug in my living room, and then for my couch, it's kind of a more rough material, and it has a little bit of a visual grain, which really helps to add some more depth to the space. Another thing that you can play with here is mixing metals. I think this is a really great way to create some visual interest in a space that's feeling a little bit flat. Personally, I find it a little bit scary because it can be a little bit difficult to intertwine. So one way that I've done this is through really subtle elements. So again, let's use my living room for example. I have a wonderful Jerry Johnson chair that I got pretty quickly after I moved in. It has this really great chrome pipe kind of design to it. It is a lot of chrome. And my couch, when I got it, it has a brass base. And so these two were very conflicting for a long time, and I couldn't figure out ways to blend them together and make them feel a little bit more seamless. One way that I went about doing this is just doing things in smaller elements. So I did candlestick holders on my coffee table that are brass to tie in the brass base of the couch, and I also incorporated some more chrome into my space by adding another accent chair. If you're getting at what I'm saying, you kind of have to counteract some of the materials of furniture pieces to create this balance. Another thing that can really throw off your space is improper measurements when it comes to hanging your artwork. A lot of the times when you live in a space and you hang your artwork, you kind of just go what looks best to the eye when you go and hang it, and I wouldn't recommend this, to be honest. I would say that my personal rule is hanging artwork 6 to 10 inches off of whatever furniture piece or architectural element it's being hung from. For example, the painting that I have in my living room is hung about 7 or 8 inches from the half-length wall that I have in my living room. Usually these measurements tend to feel right, but obviously it is a case-by-case basis. The next thing I want to talk about is not embracing negative space. This is something I talked about in my last video on how to style decor in your space. Let me just reiterate here. It is very important to space things intentionally to create a visual vignette that is striking, because a lot of the times if you feel like your space is feeling a little bit off or flat and what I've been calling a decorated space, it could be due to lack of visual interest, and one main way to incorporate visual interest is through a striking vignette. For example, in my living room, right, I have all these horizontal low lines, and then I counteract that with these striking vertical pieces that really emphasize the scale of the space. And as I was talking about, this is also very important when you're styling your decor. Take the wall behind me, for example. Embracing space when styling your decor is very important because it allows you to see what you have and be happy with it. Something I think people tend to do when they move in is, buy a bunch of this decor that they don't really need or they don't really use and they don't really love because they think it will make their space feel decorated. And this is a huge mistake. I think taking personal and sentimental items and styling them around your home can make a lot more of an impact, and that goes to say even if you have less of them. I talk about this quite a lot, but when you move in somewhere, you don't need to have things feel automatically done and automatically decorated. Like, that's not realistic, and I think sometimes we fall for the Instagram and the Pinterest images of things, and we get a little bit discombobulated. You know what I'm saying? We kind of have to put ourselves back into reality and understand that that is a lot of money to do, and a lot of the times the thought process won't really be there. So taking your time and doing what you can with what you have in an intentional way can really make a big difference. Something that I also think is very important if your space is feeling decorated is that you go through what you have and you make sure that everything that you have serves a purpose, whether it's personal joy or a practical purpose. It doesn't matter, but you need to love the things in your home. You don't want to be like half okay with it and half not. You want to really love it, because what's the point of having that item? And I know that sounds like a very minimalist approach for me to say, but it is something that is really important, especially when it comes to mobility around your space. You don't want to feel like you're being trapped by a bunch of different items. And this leads me into the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is an inappropriate layout for your space. This is something that is really important. You need to analyze your day-to-day routine, what you're going to be doing in your space, and then design your layout around that, because anything else is not going to work for you. You're going to be bumping into furniture left and right, and you're just going to be cranky all day because, you're running into things, and I don't think anybody really likes that. Personally, I live in a studio apartment, so I'm working with one kind of large room. I do have a wall-to-wall off my bedroom area, but it's still a studio apartment, right? As I said before, I don't feel like running into things all the time. I had to take that into account. I am somebody who loves furniture. I am really passionate about home design and decor, and so having a lot of furniture would just come very naturally to me. Hi everybody, you might be wondering why I've changed locations, but as I was saying, the functionality and design of the layout of your home is very important to the way that it feels when you're in the space. Which leads me to talking about the sponsor of today's video, which is SMARTWINGS Motorized Blinds. SMARTWINGS offers beautiful custom drapery at which you can open at the touch of a button. For my space, I found this extremely important because I live in a studio apartment, and something that I find myself craving is some privacy when it comes to my bedroom. Because I wanted that privacy, SmartWings is a extremely great option to wall off my bedroom and really make my studio feel like a one-bedroom apartment. I really love that it's remote operated, and really allow my space to feel open, but also give me the opportunity to close things off. And not only is SmartWings great for closing off a room, but it also functions beautifully as a window treatment as well. You can choose from a variety of materials and colors and get them custom made to your space. Drapery is extremely important in making your space feel warm and cohesive, and that's exactly what SmartWings brings to the table. If you want to get drapes like mine, you can visit smartwings.com and check out the options that they have. As you guys know, I would never promote a product that I don't absolutely love, and this is something that I have in my own home that really brings me a lot of happiness on a day-to-day basis. All right, everybody, let's move on to what makes a room feel designed. This is what we're all here to see. How do we achieve a finished and cohesive look in our space? I talked a little bit about this before, but the first thing is going to be playing with scale and proportion. This would be using contrasting furniture pieces, for example, an oversized lamp and a very low slung sofa. Taking a risk when it comes to furniture. I find that a lot of people find a furniture piece that they really love, but they don't end up getting it because they feel like it's too big of a risk. And I think this is one of the biggest mistakes people tend to make when it comes to designing their space. You want to embrace that risk. You want to take it and you want to get a furniture piece that's going to stand out and that you really love. You can always design around it to make something that's very visually beautiful. Obviously, this goes without saying, but you need to consider proportion and size of the furniture piece. But this can create a really great vibe that kind of invites a more dramatic feeling when you walk into the space, or it feels a little bit more grand. So something that I've done personally in my apartment, as I said before, I live in a studio, right? So there's not a ton of space to play with, but I still wanted to create a really grand and inviting room. As soon as you walk in the front door, I've placed a beautiful lounge chair and a really nice plant directly in the sight line as you walk in. And that allows the eye to be drawn to a certain focal point that is really beautiful. There is an architect named Frank Lloyd Wright who talks a lot about compression and release when it comes to designing. This is something that I really love. Walking into a space and feeling like you're cozy, you're warm, it feels a little bit smaller, and then as you move forward, it starts to open up and you just get a huge overload of different scale that creates a very grand and dramatic space. The next thing I wanted to talk about in making your space feel designed is playing with visual hierarchy. This goes into what I was saying about scale before, but this also applies to color in a really important way that I wanted to talk about. So let's talk about the color palette of my apartment. I have a beautiful green wool rug in my living room that creates a base for the room, and then I've got two black accent chairs that sit across from my couch. I would say that my couch is the visual anchor in this space because it is very unique and very loud in its color, and all of these other items that I've styled around it would be secondary items to that. They would help support that piece and draw the eye to it. For example, my couch is very low to the ground. It's a very low-lying couch. It's a mid-century piece. Mid-century pieces tend to be like that. It was really important for me to select a pretty low standing coffee table and some pretty low standing chairs to kind of emphasize the couch in the room. It's really about finding something you really love and styling around it in a way that highlights the piece of furniture that you want to be highlighted the most, if that makes sense. The next thing I wanted to talk about is pretty brief, but it's important, and that is understanding that you don't have to have symmetry everywhere. I think it's very important to embrace asymmetrical motifs when it comes to design because it really creates for a more interesting space. Let's say I had, two standard lamps on both sides of my couch. Would it look nice? Yes, but would it look as impactful as when I have one oversized swing arm lamp that really makes a statement? No. Another example of this would be the art I have in my living room, right? It has a very tall vertical scale, and notice that it's not hung directly above the couch. If I were to do that, it would look very off, and it would shrink the space and not make it feel as long. The next thing I want to talk about is texture layering. And what I mean by this is just not using one singular texture. One of the main reasons as to why I don't gravitate towards the whole beige neutral aesthetic is because it just has a lack of textural and material variety. they use a lot of, bleached oak, black, and beige, and that's about it. And obviously, all of those things on their own, they can be worked into a really great space, but just using that is not enough to create something visually interesting. I think mixing wood tones can be a really great way to achieve this eclectic look and allow for a little bit more leniency when it comes to variety. But also, there are some rules to this that I do want to tell you guys about. So if you're going to try and mix woods or mix two of the same material that have a different color or, grain or whatever, you want to make sure that they're still in the same family, but they aren't too contrasting to where it would look weird. If I incorporated bleached oak into my space that has a lot of teak and walnut, it would look very off because it's so white and unsaturated in comparison to the other woods. So if you're doing warmer, more saturated woods, do that with a bunch of different types of wood. If you want to do a more cooler tone space, you can do the same thing when it comes to unsaturated woods. This also applies to fabrics and other materials. I do have very loud colors in my space. I have a bright green rug, I have a bright red couch, but the reason why they work together is because they are similar levels of saturation and they are also similar levels of warmth. So the key takeaways from this would be that you just want to be overall more thoughtful when it comes to designing your space. Take it slow, don't rush into things. I know that it might not feel as satisfying or you might not be as happy with things when it's in an awkward phase, but just know that this isn't just you. Every time you move somewhere, there's going to be an awkward phase. I think a lot of the time, society around us tells us that we can't have that and everything just needs to look perfect immediately, which is definitely not the case. You want to avoid surface decorating without thinking about things and just kind of throwing whatever wherever. That tends to make things look a little bit cluttered and a little bit off in general. And again, focus on scale, texture, and the layout of your space. It really helps to make a difference here. And overall, I think that when a room feels designed, you can also feel it emotionally because it feels lighter and it doesn't feel like it's weighing on you. Anyways, that is all that I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments, or if you're interested in hiring me as your interior decorator, you can go on my website where you can find my email and we can set up a consultation and move from there. I hope you guys are having a great Sunday or whatever day you're watching this, and yeah, bye.